Welcome to the Roth Culinary Scene. I'm Chef Mike, and today's session is an introduction to the Wolf Convection Steam Oven. This Wolf Convection Steam Oven is one of my favorite pieces in the Wolf collection. It finally gives us the ability to harness the power and the versatility of both moist heat and dry heat. So sit back and see if I can't go through this material and give you a better understanding of why this piece might fit in your selection. I want to start with a very simple introduction of the geometry of this oven. Then I'll come back to some of the food items that I have out in front here. This oven, particular one I'm standing in front of, is a contemporary model. If you take a look inside, behind the door, it's a 24-inch all stainless steel box. There's a fan on the back wall that has an embedded heat element, and that's where all of our dry heat will come from. To access the water, it's a simple front water tank. Comes right out, and what it's looking for is just regular tap water. And when this tank is full, you should be able to steam continuously for about 90 minutes. Now, if you're steaming any food for 90 minutes, give us a call if something's gone wrong, because there's not any food that needs to steam that long. But perhaps you're canning or you're using it for sous-vide, both of which I'll talk about in a few moments. Inside this box, your oven will come with two metal racks, a perforated pan, and a solid pan. And between this combination of racks and pans, you ought to be able to put vessels of many kinds in your oven. I don't hesitate to put anything in here: pie pan, metal, ceramic, your enamel-coated cast iron. The only thing I stop short of is perhaps my raw cast iron, that large skillet you have, and only because it might absorb some moisture that is unintended. But it's actually safe to use that in there as well. The probe, which we'll talk about in a moment also, is connected to the side of the oven, and it may be a little difficult to see from where you are, but there's a little door on the right-hand side of the oven as you face it. That is where you connect your probe. Now, the steam will enter the cavity at the lower and the upper right-hand corners, and as I said, all your dry heat will come from this convection fan. There's a slight depression in the center of the oven. It'll often, after you have steamed, the oven attempts to recapture as much steam as possible, and it actually pumps it back into that tank. But it'll always leave you a little residual here that it's a good idea just to wipe up. If you don't have time, based on what's going on, you don't have to do that, but know when you come back to it, you may have to put a little steam in it if it's dried completely and left a little residue. Now, I mentioned that the oven tries to recapture that steam. If you've cooked something in there like a chicken or bacon or something that has a lot of impurities in the air, those will end up in that tank. So Wolf recommends that you, after cooking something like that, you pull the tank out, you dump it, rinse it, fill it back up, and put it in there. If you leave your house for a number of weeks, go ahead and empty the tank and pull it out. You don't want that moisture trapped in there. But other than that, this tank is easy to access from the front. Now, across the front of this oven, regardless of which button you push first, the first thing that will come up is the quick start menu. And if you look at that quick start menu, it goes from left to right with 6 different quick start modes. Let's start with the left and work our way across. When we're doing that, the 2 arrows here and the enter button are going to be exactly how you navigate this entire panel. If it gives you a check mark with a box around it, it's looking for you to acknowledge that with an enter. If it is having you change temperature or something else, we'll use these 2 arrow keys, and I'll show you as we go through a couple of modes. The first mode up is steam. Now, steam is, in this particular case, pure steam. So there's no other heating elements used. And that steam is used for a lot of different modes in the oven other than just pure steam. So let's engage that mode and take a look at the panel. When you engage that mode, it comes up and gives you a default to the oven temperature. If you hit enter, at that point you're able to adjust the temperature of that steam all the way down to 90 degrees, which is good for some items. Using the arrows, you set the temperature that you want and you hit enter. And then as you wait at this point, these little lines across here will count down, giving you about 10 seconds. If you need to make an adjustment on another element here, otherwise you can go all the way over to the right and just hit enter and the oven will start automatically. So for steam, for the steam mode, what are some things that you might use pure steam from? Well, it comes to mind vegetables, surely. But in addition to steaming vegetables, you can also steam blanch them. Blanching is that process you used to have on the stovetop with a big pot of salted boiling water. You dumped your green vegetables in there for about 4 minutes. You pulled them out and shocked them. And that gave you the protection of nutrients and color and texture. And that really ended up with a great way to preserve those vegetables for later in the week. We got a question. The new steam oven, you know what I'm going to do at the end of this session? I want to talk about the steam oven as a whole and how it operates. And at the very end, I will take a couple of minutes and point out some of the new features on the new steam oven. Our chef team is super excited about it, but we don't yet have it here. But I will come back to that at the very end of the session. Anything I cover here is true for the new oven in terms of how it functions. So that's a great question. Thank you. Now, steam is also used for cooking grains, your rice, your quinoa, your farro. All of that can be done open container using steam. And no longer will you be tied to that magic ratio on top of your oven that had the perfect amount of liquid in rice and you couldn't lift the lid and you couldn't stir it because the rice became gummy. All of that's over. You place this dish, open container, in your oven, on steam, set the timer, and you can serve it in that same dish. No starch line, perfectly cooked grains every single time. You can also do things like eggs, hard-boiled, soft-boiled, or poached. Crack the egg into a small bowl or ramekin and you can poach that egg. It won't have those wispy tails that it sometimes has when you do it on top of a cooktop, but it's also extremely much easier. So steam is used in a lot of ways. It's also used to do things like sanitize. You can sanitize baby bottles, dog chew toys. You can prepare canning jars. You can actually seal canning jars. Boiling water canning only, not pressure canning. But the oven harnesses steams for all of those modes. Let's take a look at the second mode on this oven, and that's straight convection. The straight convection, Wolf is really good with its symbology. It's always going to give you the symbol and the word. So straight convection, just like your other Wolf appliances, uses an embedded heat element in the fan housing to provide very consistent, convective, dry heat. So you can bake cookies in here, you can bake a cake, you can roast proteins, you can roast vegetables. Everything you can do in a convection oven, you can now do in this oven. And even though it looks like it is small, you can do 2 4-quart casseroles in this without any problem. There's plenty of room in this oven. Convection has a range from 90 all the way up to 440. So you have a big band of cooking that can be done on the pure convection mode. Now on pure convection, I've cooked several items today, but I didn't use either one of those pure modes. Everything that we cooked today ended up being a combination mode. So I want to talk about what the next mode is, and that is convection steam. Now convection steam uses the symbol of the fan and the cloud, again, very consistent. And the range of temperatures on that goes from 180 to 440. Now the reason that's important is this oven is going to dose steam into the cavity throughout the cooking time and cook with dry heat. And I know that's kind of a hard thing to wrap your head around. And because we've never worried about having both of those things harnessed in the oven, it's just something we have to kind of test a little bit and believe in. But you have the ability to use convection steam and still end up with a nice brown colored ingredient. It's not a problem at all in terms of that both things working. So we're going to take our broccoli today, and our broccoli I've just simply tossed in a little bit of lemon olive oil, and I'm going to season it with a little bit of salt. Quick note, you don't want to season your vegetables or your proteins until just before you cook them, because if you do it too early, salt tends to bring the moisture out, and what we really want to do is we want those to be nice and crisp. So I've got one of the perforated pans that you can see through, and I've got this coated broccoli, and I've seasoned it with a little salt. I'm going to spread it out. Now, if you were roasting broccoli in your oven, it's very common in your regular oven. It's very common these days. Typically, you would set it for 375 or 400, depending on your particular oven. So I'm going to choose 375, but I'm going to choose convection steam. Again, the idea is I'm going to end up with a perfectly tender green stem and toasted brown flowerets on the outside. So it's a great combination mode. We'll place this in the oven. We'll adjust our temperature up to 375. We'll hit start, and then let's set a timer, just in case we get busy and forget to check it. I'm going to set it for about 20 minutes. We'll see what it is. It's also worth noting when you look at the control panel during this mode, there's a steam cloud all the way to the left-hand side with a check mark over it. And what that indicates is even though you're in a convection mode, steam is being introduced into the cavity. Now, you do have the ability, based on the recipe you're doing, if you want to turn that steam off somewhere during the mode. Perfect example, I have a free-form meatloaf recipe that I love, and I typically cook it on convection steam for a short period of time in the beginning till it holds its shape. Then I just switch to straight convection and let it cook, and at the very end I want to soften that glaze. That particular method of convection steam and straight convection and then a little bit of steam at the end is very accomplishable with this mode. In order to toggle that steam on and off, you just move your highlighted area over there, hit enter, you'll see the check marks off. I can turn it back on and go right back to cooking. So in this case, what I want is that cavity to be full of steam. I want it to start to cook that broccoli and then cook it with dry heat. Let's talk about when you might use those two things. When you've cooked in an oven before, a regular oven, you never mind putting your hand in a full-size oven at 350 unless you touch the metal, right? We've all done it. We've put our hand in there. But you wouldn't put your hand over a tea kettle that was spewing steam at only 212 degrees. And that's because there's so much more energy in that steam. And because this oven gives you the ability to harness both of those things, anytime you're doing a mode that is convection and steam, it's likely to end up being a little bit faster. And you're using the benefits of steam cooking and then still getting the results that we're comfortable with as dry cooking. Convection steam is used in here, and there's a wonderful mode guide you get with this oven, and it's one thing I just recommend you look at the very beginning, just to try to get a sense of what things do you use on convection steam and what things that you don't. There's a lot of bone-in, skin-on poultry that benefits from that power of that steam to render the fat from underneath, and then the ability to brown that skin with dry heat. I have a turkey breast in my other steam oven on the other side of the kitchen here that I'll bring into the picture as soon as it's done. And you'll get a chance to see how that combination mode works. Other things that make sense in addition to broccoli example is Brussels sprouts. It's a time of year where you're going to roast those vegetables. Perfect for convection steam because you can let the steam soften that Brussels sprout. It'll be bright green, it'll have a tender center, and then you can still char the outside of the leaves with dry heat. Now the reason we like that is a steamed Brussels sprout has one flavor, Brussels sprout. A roasted Brussels sprout has more than 50. As you start to burn those outer leaves and charcoal and caramelize those, you'll pick up those other flavors. So it's a great choice in this oven. It's that combination of steam and dry heat is also the way that the auto steam bake mode works in this oven. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I'll come back to that mode in just a second. Back to the quick start menu. After we have done the convection, steam, and convection steam, the next mode on there is convection humid. And this is perhaps one of the ones that's a little more confusing. The symbol for it is a fan with a couple of drops. This mode does not actually introduce any moisture into the cavity. But what it does do is it protects all of the moisture in the cavity. Let me give you an example. In your regular oven, you've been cooking lasagna or scalloped potatoes for a long time. You always covered them with foil for the first part of cooking. Why? You did that to protect the moisture. You allowed it to be protected so the top wouldn't burn while the middle was still raw. That is accomplished in a regular oven by using foil and then pulling the foil off. What happens in a traditional oven is there's a recirculation fan that's constantly pulling out moisture. So you're adding hot air and you're pulling out moisture, and that's the way food cooks. In your steam oven, they've given you a mode called convection humid. And the biggest difference is it shuts off that recirc valve. So what you end up with is every bit of moisture that's in the food that you put in that cavity stays in the cavity. Now, when would that be beneficial? Think about turkey, chicken, pork, those things that we tend to overcook. Also think about muffins that have a wonderful moist crumb as opposed to bread. Even quick breads, zucchini, pumpkin, banana, all of those truly benefit from having the ability not to have any moisture leave the cavity. Now, additionally, think of your lasagna or your scalloped potatoes in this oven. You no longer have to cover them. You can do them completely uncovered on convection humid, and you'll get a perfectly brown top. It will set the filling to the perfect temperature, and you'll end up with that excellent result without that need to pull the foil off. Question?
For Brussels sprouts, do you need to turn off the steam feature in order to get the caramelization, or does that combination do it for you?
The question was, in the steam roasted Brussels sprout, do you have to turn off the steam in order to get the caramelization at the end? And in my experience, I have not. I have run that with the steam on the whole time. I would say it is somewhat dependent on the size of your Brussels sprout. If you have really large Brussels sprouts, you want to make sure you steam them enough until they're tender, and you may have to turn the steam off at the end. And I would also say this is part of your personal preference. If you like them really charred, then let them get nice and done and tender, and then toggle that steam off. But in my experience in cooking that dish, it's not required. I prepare them the same way you do. I toss them in a little oil, I season them with salt and pepper, I might put a little bacon on them because that's good, and then I just roast them in that steam roasted mode. So I would say typically not, but for your personal taste that you might. It's a great question. So ours are running there. We'll see what that broccoli chars in a moment. So we've talked about steam, we've talked about convection, we've talked about the combination of convection steam, and now we've talked about convection humid. Convection humid is a mode that you will see on that quick start guide for anything that you think would benefit. In addition to those baked goods I mentioned, I think it does really well on bone-in poultry. The turkey breast that we cooked today, which will be brought in here in a moment, was cooked on convection humid. A whole turkey, and by the way, Wolf says you can do up to a 14-pound turkey in here. They might even say you can do a little larger. I don't recommend one any larger than that, only because it's not that huge a box, and I would rather accomplish it with a bird in the neighborhood of 12 to 14 pounds. In that mode, you do use convection steam. Another question?
Yeah, for a lasagna in the convection humid mode, would it cook it faster than in a standard oven?
It will end up cooking it a little bit faster, and you'll be able to tell because, believe it or not, you can probe the inside of your lasagna once it starts to set a little bit, and you'll know exactly when it's done. But just that switch from a traditional bake in a traditional oven to a convection mode will probably speed the time up by about 25%. So if your lasagna was typically cooked covered for an hour and then uncovered, start checking that in convection humid here, uncovered, somewhere around 40 minutes or so. 40 to 45 minutes. Start taking a look, and then you'll adjust to the doneness based on the outside. But you can, as I said, use that probe even in casseroles and baked goods. We can also probe the inside of quick breads. Like, I don't know if you've ever had one or not, but I've pulled a pumpkin loaf out before. It looked beautiful, or banana bread, it looked beautiful, brown crust on top, only to have it slowly sink in the center because it wasn't quite done. If you use your probe in the center after the bread has set its crust, you'll know exactly when it's done, and you won't have to second guess of whether that loaf will turn out or not. So beyond convection humid, there are two more quick start modes on that menu. The first one is reheat, and this is where you can bring back to life, refresh food that you have not had a chance to enjoy for the second time, otherwise known as leftovers. You get home in time and you don't have your food is on a plate, a chicken breast, some green beans, and maybe a little Alfredo noodles. We all put it in the microwave before, we covered it with a wet paper towel, we set the power selector to something, and we hope for the best. In this oven, you put that plate of food in here uncovered. You choose reheat, and it will use low, dry heat and a blanket of steam across the top to perfectly refresh this food. It will bring back the sauce on the Alfredo without breaking it. It will warm the chicken and the beans. I had a client who bought this oven and said they would never reheat meat any other way because you can bring back your rare flank steak without continuing to cook it by that combination. Now, in addition, you have the ability in that reheat, if you choose auto reheat, to choose whether it's crispy or moist. Example might be, when would I ever want it crispy reheated? Well, in the showroom, we rarely eat at the same time. I'd made grilled cheese and tomato soup for our whole team. We ate at all different hours of the day. Not only could I hold the soup for 4 hours because Wolf's commitment to low temperature, but we could reheat a grilled cheese sandwich from the refrigerator. Now, I'm sure you may have looked at a grilled cheese leftover sandwich before, decided it wasn't worth putting in the microwave, throw it in the trash, and start over. I was able to bring back a perfectly crisp outside texture and absolutely melted the cheese again, all using crispy auto reheat. This oven will change how we do that. The last mode on the quick start menu is sous vide. Now, many of you may be interested in sous vide. Many of you may not have a lot of acquaintance with that particular cooking technique. If you're a sous vide person, know that you're now going to do that in a steam immersion as opposed to a water bath. Sous vide is a process of sealing food in a BPA vacuum sealed plastic and then cooking it at the doneness temperature for a long time. As an example, your beef tenderloin, your filet mignon that you like at a perfectly done temperature, very picky about your temperature, you can seal it in the bag, set the steam for 120, let it go its 2 hours, and that will be perfectly cooked to 120. Then you cut the bag open and you'll need to sear it to give it some texture. Wolf gives you a couple of pages worth of references for sous vide cooking, and just remember it's done in steam now. The Wolf convection steam oven is excellent for sous vide because your steam is controllable within 1 degree, exactly what you need for sous vide. One last note on sous vide, the times are equivalent to your water immersion for those of you that already sous vide. If you want more information on that, reach out to any of our chefs in your closest showroom. We'll be happy to get you some additional information. Now, after that mode, if you look at this panel, there's a few other things up here. Gourmet is next. And what Gourmet is, and it's present now on our convection steam oven, it's present on the Wolf speed oven, it's present in our electric ovens, it's present in the ovens that are in our induction range and our dual fuel range. It is the ability to tell the oven what you're cooking and have it recommend a temperature and a time and perhaps even the position in the oven, all of these things. So you just walk up to it, tell it what you're cooking, and it will make a recommendation. I find that particularly useful in an oven that maybe we haven't grown up with in our kitchen that has this ability to harness steam. Having that little Gourmet guide in there is a big help. And there are actually about 65 plus items in that Gourmet section so that you can really define what it is you're cooking. Now, typically the menu involves you pick whether I'm cooking proteins or baked goods or side dishes. And then you answer a couple of more questions. If I'm cooking poultry, am I cooking a whole bird or just breast or thighs? You identify that to that, and then it picks the mode and goes from there. It's extremely, even if you only just toggle through Gourmet to better understand how the oven works, it is a great advantage. And there's Gourmet, as I said, on the entire family of Wolf ovens. Beyond Gourmet, you drop down to the second row here, and there's a thing called More. And what More is a few more items that they couldn't squeeze into the Gourmet. The first one is a place where you can store your own recipes, not a mode I expect you're going to do in the first month or so of having the oven, but you can store multi-temperature, multi-mode recipes in there for your favorites. The second choice under More is More Gourmet. And what you'll end up with there is the ability to use fresh and frozen appetizers. Look, we all know that Trader Joe's or Costco's is going to become your caterer at some point. And the fact that you have, thank you, Chef Gill. Wow. I'll talk about all these food items in just a second. He just brought in our lovely turkey breast. So if you have frozen potato products or frozen or fresh appetizers, all the oven is going to require is you give it the time range on the back of the box. And then it's going to use sensors to perfectly cook that item. So your frozen spanakopita, your frozen taquitos, anything that's like that. Here, under More Gourmet, frozen appetizers, and pick the time. Next to that, under that menu, is Auto Steam Bake. Now this is where you can take someone who's an everyday baker or a never-day baker, and you might try it in this oven. When you bake bread in the industry, it's often done in an oven that you can introduce steam. Steam gives us this beautiful crust on the outside of the bread. What happens is you still have to make the dough. You still have to rise, the dough needs to rise. You still have to form the loaf. All of those things have to happen. Now you can proof in your steam oven or in your full-size oven. You have the ability to proof in those ovens without any problem at all. Wolf gives you the control down to 85 degrees. 85 degrees is a great place for doughs to double in size. I don't know about your home, but there's nowhere in my home that it's 85 degrees. And that means dough takes longer to double in size. Once you've got your final loaf shape, you put it in, you tell it what color you want the crust, and the oven will take care of the auto steam bake process from there. You typically identify whether it's a braided loaf or a regular loaf. In this case, our sous chef put together some beautiful, just traditional white bread, just this beautiful loaf baked in a convection steam oven. It's going to be nice with this turkey for a little sandwich in a few minutes. Auto steam bake also, if you're doing something like a braided loaf, typically when you did that in your traditional oven like challah, you would give it a little water wash or a little egg wash to make it shine. In this oven, you don't have to do that because it's going to introduce steam through the first part of baking. That will give those loaves the shine. So you go into auto steam bake, select braided loaf, place your beautiful braided loaf in there. The oven will give you the instructions the rest of the way. Beyond that, the next piece under More Gourmet is one of my favorite modes. It's an entertaining mode. It's called Slow Roast Sear. And it gives you complete flexibility. Depending on the protein you select, I can now cook with a designated end time. You select the type of meat you have, the particular cut, and you tell the oven within a 2.5 and a 4.5 hour window when you would like it done. You set the probe temperature, you shut the door, and you don't think about it. One of my favorite things to do in there is a beef tenderloin. You and I both know a beef tenderloin doesn't take more than about 40 minutes to cook. However, in this mode, you can set it to take 4.5 hours and perfectly roast it from tip to tip and not ever have to open the door. The timer's about to go off on this broccoli. So when it does, let's take a quick look. I want to see if I've got some char. There we go. Oh yeah. Beautiful. So I'm going to lean this toward so you can get a look. I've got this beautifully bright green yet perfectly charred outside. It's a little bit warm, but I've got all the brown flowerets. But the biggest difference between this and a traditional oven is a traditional oven that would have been almost army green, right? It just dehydrates and takes all the color out of the broccoli. So this now has beautiful flavor. It's charred on the outside, it's super tender on the inside, and it took about 20 minutes or so to do that. Okay, we wrapped up on auto steam bake. Just one more thing down there. There's also a place where it will help you keep track of descaling. This is something you don't need to worry about until you're actually in your ownership series. But descaling is a process of just cleaning that steam generator so it continues to generate wonderfully clean steam. The mode that allows you to sanitize, you can put anything you need to on the perforated pan, put it in there to sanitize. It'll take about 20 minutes. That same mode allows you to prepare canning jars. You put as many as you can get on this tray. You put them in there and you prepare. Meanwhile, you have your filling heated up on your stovetop. Jars come out, you fill the jars, you place the seal on top, lightly tighten the lid just like you would if you were going to use the old steam bath and pick them up into the boiling water. Then you put them back in there and you say preserve. And when you do that, about 20 minutes later, you'll open the door and you'll hear the pop, 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 pop as the jars seal themselves. This tray will hold 12 quart jars or about 24 pint jars. So you can tell there's lots of versatility in how much you could get on there and use this as a steam oven. There's also a place on there to hold your food like a warming drawer. If you get something done over this next couple weeks when you're working on your holiday baking and 2 of the things are ready, but not everything is ready, but I need to hold it and I don't want to, makes a great warming drawer. You just convert it to that setting, set the temperature, it will hold everything beautifully warm. Again, the commitment to the low temperature. Question?
Why did the pan warp?
Great question, and I would say warp is the wrong word. Warp sounds permanent. It twisted. And here's what's going on. This pan is particularly thin. The stainless steel is very, very thin. And sometimes at high temperatures, typically I've only seen it above 375. When it first comes out, it's slightly twisted. And then as it cools, as you can tell, it's already back to a non-twisted state. And that just has to do with how thin that metal is. And if you take a look inside the oven, the racks where you place it, they actually give you an upper and a lower rail just so that doesn't disturb the food when that happens. It is expected and it should flatten back out in about 90 seconds. I also had the experience that over time, the more you use them, the less that happens. So if that's something that you encounter, you may not encounter it for very long. Great question, though. I hadn't quite got there. Beyond that, there's settings on this for your language and your lights and your display. The only thing I want to tell you there is if you've ever inadvertently changed the language. I had a lady who called me absolutely beside herself because somebody had inadvertently changed the language to Japanese while they were cleaning the oven. And while that is easy to do, if you can't read that language, it's very confusing to undo. So one thing to remember, if you go to the settings menu and you hit the right-hand arrow, go all the way to the right, it restores factory presets. You can get back to a language that will help you. Let's talk about some of this food that's in front of us. We already covered the broccoli. We cooked that on convection steam. We got some beautiful brown charred flowerets and this beautiful soft tender stem. Our bread has this beautiful brown crust. Thank you, Gil. It just looks lovely, cooked in the convection steam oven as a perfected loaf. When we first started, I had some pumpkin soufflés, and these are one of my favorite soufflés to cook in there. It's a pumpkin pie filling-esque, but if you have guests at the holidays that are gluten-free, here's a perfect option. All that flavor of pumpkin pie without the crust. Now, these cooked on the convection humid mode. If you remember, that's the mode that doesn't allow any moisture to escape the cavity, but we cooked it uncovered. So it allows it to perfectly cook that custard, but not overcook it, but not dry it out. If it was just in a dry oven, you'd have to be more concerned about it drying out. Lastly, let's take a look at our turkey. This was just a bone-in turkey breast. We placed it in the oven for a full turkey uses convection steam. For a turkey breast, it recommends convection humid. For a large turkey breast, I still recommend maybe using convection steam because what I want is this beautiful brown crust. It's just absolutely beautifully browned here. The crust has a nice crisp texture to it, and the juice and the moisture of that turkey will be unrivaled. When my grandmother, bless her heart, cooked turkey, it was always cooked to more than 200 degrees and as dry as powder. You had to have gravy and mashed potatoes or you couldn't eat it. It's because we didn't know as much about temperatures. You can probe this and know exactly when it's at 165, which is a minimum temperature. You have to get to the minimum for everything to be safe. But at 165, your turkey will be moist and juicy. This cooked in about 55 minutes, thereabouts. It is a 2.5 pound half breast. So that gives you some sense of how long they would take. I wasn't so worried about the time because I used a probe perfectly inserted in there to tell me exactly what was going on inside this from the outside. So the range of food that you can do in here with all of these modes should be nothing but to inspire you to take this oven on. And the best news of all is with a Wolf Convection Steam Oven, you get support from your local Roth Living showroom chef for the life of that product. We are here to make sure if you've had something that went really well, that's awesome. If you had something that didn't go well, don't hesitate to reach out to us and let us help in that sense. Now, somebody asked towards the beginning of the session a couple of some information about the new generation of Wolf Convection Steam Oven that is coming out. And I don't have any imagery today, but let me describe a couple of the features that our chef team is super excited about. That oven is currently being produced. You might still be in the window depending on whether you can order the existing second generation model or the new one. But the new one has a couple of great additional features that just make sense in the evolution of this oven. First of all, if you looked at this, you could tell that it was trimmed out to 30 so that it would conveniently stack over another oven and look like one contiguous space. But the box inside was only 24. In the new generation of the oven, it's available both as a 24 and a full 30-inch cavity. Full cavity. Question?
Maybe after we talk about the new CSO, could you maybe explain a little bit more about how to use the probe?
Sure. I'll ask Gil to get me a probe from off camera, and I will absolutely do that. Let me retouch these features, and then I will absolutely show you how that probe used. In addition to it being a full cavity, that means now there'll be 2 convection fans in there. Wolf knows that 2 convection fans with an embedded heat element provides for a much more even space, and now that we have that full 30, we have enough room for that. Thank you, sir. And they've added a broil element on top. So in addition, this oven is existing condition. There's no bake element, there's no broil element, only the dry element on the back. And as versatile as it is, we're excited to see what we can also take on with an added broil element. They've also added full extension racks to the lowest 3 positions, so that you have a full extension rack to glide out that will hold both the perforated, the solid pan, and a wire rack. Lastly, in terms of features, is it will have the ability to either be plumbed or unplumbed. Now this, in its 2nd generation, only front accessible water. Wolf's never going to give that up because it gives you the ability to put this oven anywhere in your design. It can go in your butler's pantry, it can go in the passageway between the kitchen and the butler's pantry, it can go somewhere that you don't have a water line or a drain line. But they've given you now the option in the new oven to have that perfectly plumbed if that's the one that you choose. Lastly, the interface is completely different. We're excited as a chef team to get a touch panel. There's a touch panel involved. There'll be a little bit less clicking and finding areas because you'll be able to take your favorites and drag them to the front. I wish I had more imagery to show you or the ability to show you the oven. We're super excited. We expect those to start being available for delivery sometime after the first of the year. I would like to back up and talk about the probe. I appreciate the question. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to give you some background with this cloth here so you can see the probe. These probes only measure in the last ½ an inch of the probe. This is where the sensor is to send that temperature to the oven. But you want to insert it in food so that this entire metal shaft is covered. I had a customer who put it in her chicken and she was so happy the chicken turned out beautiful. But she said when I got into it, the skin was brown, but the inside was raw. And I said, did you use the probe? She said, of course I used the probe. And she showed me a picture and the probe was stuck in like this with all of this showing. So she got a false indication that the probe, that the chicken was done. So if you think about a chicken breast, it always has a thin end and a thick end. You want to figure out how to put this. This doesn't work very well. It's very hard to hit that center. Come in from the thin end, bury it into the thick end, and now you have a great measurement. If it's a beef or a pork tenderloin, again, this is really hard. So come in at a shallow angle and get it into the thickest part. And remember, you can probe both casseroles and things like lasagna, any proteins, as well as baked goods. I do find a little bit of problem with fish depending on the geometry. If you're doing a whole side of salmon, you have room, but a fish fillet or a fish steak doesn't have quite enough mass to use this, and for those you may have to use your traditional methods of timing and observation. This probe is accurate to plus or minus 1 degree. It will become your absolute best friend because you never open the door to see what's going on inside your oven. One word of caution. If you put this in the perfect place, you thought, absolute perfect place, and 10 minutes later the oven says, I'm done, know that you could have touched the bone. You might have been in the fat pocket. It is a wonderful oven, but it's not magic. If it doesn't pass the logic test that this food has had enough time to cook, and it will cook faster than some other ovens, but know that it's possible that the probe might need to be repositioned. Next week or 2 weeks when we do our turkey, I tend to like to probe in the thigh area towards the bottom, and I set that probe to 175 degrees because that's the temperature we like our thigh and leg meat to be cooked. If you're in the breast, if that's where you're probing, 165 is your target temperature. But typically in my Wolf oven, turkey in here now, 11 to 12 pounds, stay in that range, up to 14. Down in that thigh area though, we like that texture. This is your best friend. It will perfectly cook that food. If you need to reposition the probe, just to make sure you're right, that can be done without restarting the oven. Last note, this one, this convection steam oven probe has a black cable and black ends. If you have another Wolf oven, it will have a dark navy blue color. So make sure. The engineer and me wanted to test them out. They are not the same. They are not interchangeable. So make sure you have the right probe for the right oven. So I know that was a fast 45 minutes, but I wanted to give you a chance to get some information and understand this very powerful, flexible piece in the Wolf convection steam oven. A little bit of teaser towards the new generation that's coming out, but everything that you love to cook just might be better in the steam oven if harnessing the power of steam or protecting the moisture in the product is of value. I'd like to open it up to any additional questions at this point. I'll take your quiet response as you've got enough information today. Please take the opportunity to reach out to your closest Roth Living showroom for more information. We are all abuzz about the new oven as well as the entire product line. If you need more information, don't hesitate to contact us. Special thanks to Lynn. Oh, there's a question.
Back to the broccoli.
Back to the broccoli.
You did not toss it in olive oil?
I had done that before, while it was in the bowl. I tossed it in oil before I came on the camera. So it was coated in the oil, and then I seasoned it with salt and roasted it. A special thank you to Lynn, who was on the other side of this camera, moderating all the questions and making sure that we get this all done. She is my partner in crime on this virtual session from the culinary scene. Folks, thanks for joining us. Come back here often for recipes, use and care, or inspiration. Thanks for joining us.